We've already gone into some depth about tuning a rack tom, and now today we're going to move on to floor toms. There will be a little bit of rehashing here since it's a similar sort of drum, but there are some specific things about floor toms that do have to be addressed. The first thing to know about floor toms as opposed to a rack tom is that they're sitting directly on the floor. They're not mounted in the side onto your bass drum or off of a cymbal stand. This affects the resonating properties of the drum because now you've got 3 nodes of mounting, in some cases even 4 with some older, very large floor toms. Recently we touched on resonant heads in a previous episode, and this drum actually received new resonant heads a few weeks ago, and today we've put on a new batter head. It's a nice kind of middle of the road head, 10 mil coated. Today it's an Evans UV1, and the bottom is an Evans coated G1. This is also a sort of mid-sized floor tom. It's a 14-inch diameter, 14-inch deep maple drum with die-cast hoops top and bottom and 8 lugs to a side. Today we're starting with a sort of low tuning. The bottom head is tuned to sort of a medium pitch, and the top is tuned just a little bit above finger tight. I finger tightened all of the screws and then just gave each one a little turn in a star pattern to make sure that the head was seated evenly. With a good new drum head, you don't really need to worry about cracking the head onto the drum or tuning it up really high and then backing it down to get it to seat. It should seat evenly when you set it on the drum, regardless of the manufacturer, unless there's some kind of defect. Likewise, if you're having trouble getting it even once the hoop is on the drum, you may have some bending in your hoop that might need to be addressed as well. Die-cast hoops suffer from that a little bit less, but at the same time, if your die-cast hoop is bent, you'll have a very difficult time tuning the head versus a slightly deformed triple flange hoop because those will bend a little bit under pressure and conform to any issues that the hoop, the head, or the bearing edge might have. First of all, let's see what this drum is sounding like today. So right now we've got these tuned at about a B on the bottom and about an A flat on the top. That makes it a minor third or 3 half steps apart from each other. Pretty big sound, also with a lot of attack. Most of the tone we're hearing right now is coming from the bottom head because there's so little tension on the top head. This is a totally usable tuning, though it will shorten the life of your batter head just because there's not enough tension on this to really throw any of the energy back out that the stick is putting in. It all just kind of goes into the head, even if you're playing with good rebound. Having said that, it's an awesome sound and I like it a lot. Now, this is about as low as I would go with this drum for a 14. It already kind of sounds like a 16 in my mind in this room. And it's got a lot of sustain, sort of rumbling low, which can also get in the way sometimes. So let's go to tuning number 2. What we're going to do is we're going to raise both of the heads up about the same amount. All right, we've gone up a quarter turn on the bottom head and a quarter turn on the top head. Same kind of star pattern thing. I didn't really go around evening anything out. I just did the quarter turns to see what happens. A quarter turn is a lot on a tom, especially because we're starting with such a low tension. It really changes it a lot. And already, just from that, the sound of the entire drum is really, really different now. So we did the same amount of turning of the tension rails on both sides, but we have a different interval between the heads now. Now it's a whole step or 2 half steps with an F sharp on the bottom and an E on the top. And I'm not so concerned with exact intervals or, for that matter, exact note pitches when it comes to tuning a drum. I'm much more concerned with if it's giving the sound that I want and if it's giving a pitch that I can use and a feel that I can use for the kind of music that I'm playing. Right now, because of the size of this drum and the heads that are on it, it has a tremendous amount of sustain, which is great for a live and loud situation, but could also become dissonant with things that are in the same register. Now, the last thing I want to do is I want to go one step further up in tuning, and I want to go into kind of a bebop range. And when I'm tuning for jazz things like that, where I want to have a really tight sound and a really articulate, kind of quick tom sound, I forego the high bottom, low batter thing, and I go for somewhere between the same pitch and actually a tighter batter. And the reason why I like that is because the tension on the batter gives a more immediate articulation at low volume levels than something tuned down in a more pillowy range. You don't get much response out of the head that way, and if you need to project articulate pieces of music at a very low dynamic, you're going to need that batter head to respond quickly to everything you do, especially when it's an inch or 2 inches off of the drum. So I'm going to leave the resonant head where it is, and I'm going to go a quarter turn up just on the batter head, see what that does. All right, this isn't bad, but I do feel a little bit like there's some tone lacking here. I have the articulation that I want now, but I want to feel like I'm getting a little more tone also at those low dynamic levels and not just kind of honky overtones. So now I am going to tune the bottom head. We left it where it was, and I'm going to bring the bottom head up maybe less than a quarter turn, maybe like an eighth of a turn, because I don't want to go so far as to get the bottom head past the top. So just a little bit, and then we're going to check it again. That sounds pretty good to me. It's got kind of that 60s vibe. It's a little bit tighter. It's a little bit punchier. I could also see this getting used for if you were trying to do sort of throwback funk music, like, I don't know, like Mike Clark stuff from back then, where he kind of cranked the toms up like Tony Williams, but maybe put thicker heads on them. You could crank up hydraulics like this. You could try some different options and see what works. Let's see where we ended up with these intervals. So neither of those pitches is exactly on a piano note. The bottom is kind of a sharp A, and the top is kind of a flat B flat. So it's less than a half step. It's less than the notes would be on a piano. But that just goes to show you too that worrying about the exact note pitches really is not that important. It's more about how the two heads are interacting with each other. And especially when it comes to a tom this large that has this kind of distance to cover in the sound, they really need to work together to project the tone to the audience. Rack toms being smaller with the heads closer together, it's a little bit easier for the tone of that drum to get to the audience, in addition to the fact that it's elevated, and if they are down below the stage from you, they're looking at the resonant head. So it's going to be coming right at them, and with this, the tone is going this way, and they're over there. So that means that you have to get even more out of there if you're playing acoustically, and in different ways if it's mic'd. But similarly, like the guys on stage are going to want to hear your drums too. They're going to want to hear tone and not just bap, 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 you know. So these have all been sort of proper tunings where there's a certain sort of interval between the two heads and we're going for a certain kind of sound. With drums, there's no sense not experimenting too. So just to see what happens, and I have no idea what's going to happen because this is my first time putting a UV1 on a floor tom, I'm going to leave the bottom head where it is pretty tight, and I'm going to lower the batter head as low as I can and have it still make a sound and the screws not rattle, and see what that does. Okay, this is pretty good. Ben and I actually heard this in a video that Jojo Mayer did where he did some extreme tuning to his floor tom to get it to kind of growl in a super, almost like pitchy way. It sounds almost like a truck going by, like a Doppler effect, like it's high and then low. And it comes from the rods being so loose that the head is struggling to interact with the drum. But since the bottom head is so tight, it's still throwing the resonance back up through the head and making it do this crazy kind of growl thing, which if projection is not what you need, if this is more of like a recording situation or you're mic'd up really nicely in a nice place, could be a hip effect. There's no real reason to address the pitch of this batter head right now because it's so low. It doesn't really have one. And again, not an everyday sound, but it just goes to show you that with a little bit of horsing around, you can find unique things that might give a certain performance some character. And again, all of these sounds today were with the same heads on the same drum. We did it all pretty quickly, and they all sound really different. If in your life you don't have a lot of different drums, this is the kind of thing that can show you how many different drums you have in the drum that you already have. And especially with floor toms, I feel like they just need more attention than they get.